everybody, and welcome to Sotheby's. My name's Jonny Fowle. I am the spirit specialist in the Sotheby's wine department. Today, I'm going to be talking about whiskey, and I'm joined by three fantastic guests. So my first guest is going to be Emmanuel Dron, who some of you may know as the owner of a bar called Auld in Singapore, which is probably one of the most famous whiskeys in the world. It stocks over 2,000 legendary rare whiskeys. And Emmanuel is also the author of a book called Collecting Scotch Whisky Volume 1, which is a comprehensive catalogue of rare whiskies dating back over the 20th century and before. Emmanuel's been a big inspiration to me, and I think probably to quite a lot of people listening. So Emmanuel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jonny.
I'm also joined by Aaron Chan, who is a Japanese and old whiskey specialist and the owner of a bar in Hong Kong called Club Qing. Club Qing, it stocks over 400 bottles of legendary rare whiskies, many Japanese and Scotch whiskies, and is considered one of the greatest whiskey bars in Asia. Anyone who's been to Hong Kong, I'm sure, would have made a trip there. And for me, no trip to Hong Kong is complete without a visit to Club Qing. So Aaron, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone.
Finally, we have Ron Walsh, who is an extremely knowledgeable whiskey maker from Suntory. He's the master blender at Suntory currently, which means he's responsible for the quality and inventory management, and especially the inception of new products, including at the Bowmore distillery. So I think we will learn a lot from Ron today. So Ron, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jonny, and hi from Scotland.
Yes, so Ron is from Scotland. Where are you just now, Ron?
I'm working from home, so I'm in Stirling.
In Stan. And I'm here in London, just in case anyone was wondering. So we've got a global presence today. So it's great to have the opportunity to chat about whiskey on this forum ahead of our set. So we currently have a whiskey sale open in Hong Kong at the moment, which closes tomorrow. But today we're mainly going to be discussing our 18th of April whiskey auction, which is going to be held at the Hong Kong Convention Centre. The headline lot for this sale is going to be Bowmore Cabinet, which is an archive of black Bowmores from the distillery that we're offering for auction at auction for charity as a partnership with Bowmore Distillery themselves. So it's a very exciting lot, and we'll have a little look at that later. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone we will be doing some Q&A at the end, so you can put a few questions into the chat box. And we'll come to them at the end of our discussion. But before then, I guess let's kick off. So Emmanuel, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. As I said before, your bar in Singapore it's one of the most famous whiskey bars in the world. And I think for me, it was somewhere where when I first visited Singapore, I was actually in La Maison de Whisky, and someone said, you have to go to the Alliance if you've never been. So I went down, and I think it was the moment when I went into the Old Alliance that I realized the extent to which whiskey collecting existed. I'd never seen a collection that big before, let alone open and ready to drink by the glass. And you can see in the presentation that we have on screen that there's going to be a picture of Old Alliance popping up. So I'd be interested to know from you, Emmanuel, when did you start collecting? What was your first your beginning of your whiskey journey?
So my beginning of my whiskey journey, when I was younger, when I was at the age of 18, 20, I was not really an alcohol drinker. You know, among my friends, you go to university and everybody starts drinking alcohol. I was not really drinking anything. And my father was a wine drinker, so I enjoy a little bit of wine. And one day for my birthday, maybe my 18 years old, someone gave me a bottle of Glenfiddich. It was around maybe 1993, 1994, and I got a bottle of Glenfiddich 8 years at the time. He was not the 12 years old, and I enjoyed it. I said, okay, that's quite interesting. And I really clearly remember to smell it and have the pear note, you know, like very light note of that remind me the pear juice a bit. And I wanted to know more about it. And I bought the book of Michael Jackson, The Malt Whiskey Companion. And that really pushed me to know more about whiskey. there was a jazz bar in my city. I was from north of France, a city called Lille, and they had a very nice selection of single malt whiskey with around 150 single malt whiskey. It was every distillery, a lot of very nice bottling. And with a good friend of mine, we went during 3-4 months and we tried all the whiskey, all the single malt of the bar. And I start to take tasting note of it, write about it, and have my own impression. And from that, I decided to create a newsletter about whiskey and to know more. And at that time, you know, there was there was no internet, nothing. So it was not so easy to know about whiskey like we can today. And I created a newsletter called The Angel Share. It was a 10-page newsletter. And I did a trip in London, my first whiskey trip. Sorry, it was not in Scotland, around by London. And I went to Milroy's in Soho, and an amazing shop for me. And there, I remember to try a Port Ellen. It was a Port Ellen bottle for Milroy. It's still a bottle I have today here at home. And I really love it. I was very impressed by that whiskey, and I started to decide to buy Ellen and keep bottle. And I started to buy more than I could drink, and so it was the beginning of my collection and my whiskey journey.
Yeah, I think it really shows that whatever experience you had must have had a pretty profound impact, because I think you get that impression first walk into the Old Alliance and the number of bottles along the wall. Yeah. Fantastic. And I think it was the first time that I really saw a lot of independent bottlers like Samaroli, which I hadn't really, we'd heard about them over in the UK, but you don't really see them so much. I feel like Asia really brought them to life, the Asian market.
I agree with you. I think in Asia, like in Japan or what did in Singapore, then Ron did in Club Qing in Hong Kong, I think brought back a bit this legendary brand like Samaroli or Intertrade. And the main idea when I opened the bar in January 2011 was these bottles already started to be expensive, and they were not to find, and not so many people were opening this bottle. It was to have a bar where you can come and drink all these legendary bottles. It could be independent bottling, but it could have been also, we opened all the Black Bowmore and this kind of very nice bottle. So the main purpose was this of the bar. If you can't afford to buy a bottle, at least you can come and taste it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think when I first visited, I had some Brewer Hotel in there on my first visit, which was, it was pretty cool. I think in the UK, there are fewer whiskey bars who stock that kind of thing. There are still Roy's, etc. Amazing bars. But yeah, I think it was really a next level experience for me. And Aaron, I think the same thing in Hong Kong, Club Qing. I guess by the volume of the space, it's slightly smaller, but still the impact of back bar. And you had a display case with the handy playing cards, which I think now been replaced by pad and head copies.
Yes.
I think that's another just fantastic whiskey bar. So, what was your first inception into whiskey, and how did your love for whiskey come about?
Okay, I actually started collecting whiskeys around 13 years ago. At the beginning, I mostly collect Japanese whiskey because I started drinking Japanese whiskey before I started drinking Scotch whiskey. So I remember my first whiskey was actually Hibiki 21 years old. That was given to me as a birthday present or something like that. So similar to Emmanuel. And then slowly I move on to single malts of Japan, like Yoichi, Yamazaki, Hanyu, Karuizawa, and all sorts of different things. And then a few years down the road, after I started drinking, I went to Singapore and I went to the Old Alliance. And there I met Emmanuel for the first time. At that time, because I was only mainly drinking Japanese whiskey, and he seems to be very knowledgeable about all sorts of whiskeys, including Japanese and Scotch. So I asked him to pick 2 whiskeys that can really impress me. So he picked, the first one was a Bowmore, Black Bowmore First Edition. And the second one is a Bowmore 1967 full strength Sofiantino. So those 2 whiskeys are really, really impressive. They're very good. So exactly on that day, I have decided to start collecting Scotch whiskies. And then in 2015, when I have probably when I probably bought more than really much more than I can drink, I decided to turn one of my restaurants into a whiskey bar in Hong Kong. The bar is called Qing, and it's mainly focusing in old and rare whiskeys. So that is my story.
It's an amazing space. I think the first time I tried a Lagavulin White Horse was in your bar.
Probably.
And one thing I mentioned this as well to Martin Ebo, who's a Hong Kong whiskey guy. I'm sure you know. Everyone knows Club Qing because you guys have got the best lighting in there. The spotlight, the face downwards on the bar. I've actually got a picture of the bar you can see. And I think pretty much everyone on social media in Hong Kong has taken a photo in your bar and posted it. So you can always tell when you see a picture, amazing lighting, that someone's drinking in Club Qing.
Thank you very much. Yes. Actually, I think nowadays people, when they go to a bar to drink, good whiskey, of course, it's for the whiskey, for the drinking and the pleasure. But at the same time, it's also very important for people to, take photos and post on social media. So regarding the lighting, you're actually very correct. We actually, spend a lot of time deciding how the lighting should be such that people can take pictures very nicely. So.
Yeah, it definitely works. It's interesting to say I've had a conversation with a couple of people saying, I wonder if they did plan this because it's so good.
We did plan it.
It's good to see it worked. Okay, and so obviously this conversation about collecting whiskey and all these rare whiskeys and the drink that makes us so excited, it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for whiskey makers. And obviously the collecting scene out in Asia it owes a debt of gratitude to what's going on in Scotland at the source. And so without whiskey makers such as Ron we have here, obviously we wouldn't be able to discuss this spirit. So I'd be really interested to know for you, how did you get into whiskey? What was it, a passion that existed before you joined the industry? And then I guess what first job in the industry as well, and how did you begin to develop a love for whiskey?
So for me, I entered the whiskey industry when I was just turning 30. So I'd had a previous career making steel and a couple of other things. So when I joined the whiskey industry, I was more in the production side. I was the distillery manager at Strathclyde Distillery, or the shift manager, I should say. And it was very much a process-led role where ensured quality was correct. The company at that time was Allied Domecq, who also owned Lafroig Distillery. So it wasn't until I moved into inventory management with the same company in 2000, working with Robert Hicks, the master blender there, and his assistant, Sandy Hislop, that I really started to take an interest in the maturing side and also the quality side of whiskey. Prior to that, it was new make, and I was there to produce that new make quality. So only then did I start nosing with Robert in terms of all the different cask styles, and that journey is just continued, moving from Allied to Beam in 2005, taking over the inventory and quality side there, and starting to create the expressions that have been developed for Lafroig and Teachers. And then in 2014, of course, the company was bought over by Suntory. So we're now Beam Suntory, and working with the teams from the old Morrison Bowmore days with Bowmore Distillery and Auchentoshan, and also the team in Pan has been fantastic. It is really quality led, and we're looking obviously looking to the future, but we're looking to lay down legacies now to ensure that future whiskey makers have got an inventory to choose from that will create stunning expression.
So I guess it's kind of interesting that you've moved from a company where Laphroaig was your focus to Bowmore is. And obviously during this conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about Bowmore and the history and the processes around what created the Black Bowmore series. But I think a good segue into it, we've got a picture up of these 3 Samaroli bottles, which we've been lucky enough to sell at Sotheby's quite a few times over the last couple of years. And so it's a selection of 3 bottles, 2 Laphroaigs, 1 Bowmore. And I think in this image, you kind of distill one side of the collecting market. It's this independent bottling. We've got 2 different styles, really. There's a kind of spirit-led style and a more sherry cask maturation style. And so obviously, Ron, you've managed to work with these distilleries, which is pretty fascinating. So I think you can probably give us some insight into the differences in processes. But I'd quite like to go to Emmanuel, especially as you're the first person who really, it's because of you, I really understood how important Samaroli is to collectors. I'd be interested to see your thoughts on these 3 bottles and the kind of the way in which these 3 and the releases around them have really shaped the way that whiskey collectors collect today.
I think when I look at that picture, is a beautiful trinity of what Scotch whiskey can produce the best, I will say. Especially the Bowmore bouquet is absolutely stunning Bowmore from the golden area of Bowmore distillery, which was 1964, 5, 6, and with the same area was produced the Black Bowmore. So the Bowmore bouquet is such a very pure Bowmore, full of fruit, but almost like with minerality, almost like amazing Burgundy. I can say white Burgundy, and it's very impressive whiskey. And the 2 Laphroaig are the yin and the yang, I like to call of the Laphroaig, because one is the dark sherry, and the other with a beautiful example of maturation can bring to the whiskey, which is also the case for the Black Bowmore. And 1970 is like really all about the beauty of distillation. So it's the same about purity, minerality, you have a saltiness, you have fruit. People always ask me which whiskey you want to bring on the desert island. If you have to bring 1 bottle, I always say the Laphroaig 1970, because it's probably my favorite whiskey. So that's...
Yeah, I remember you told me that before, because I think a lot of people, Bowmore Bouquet 1966 is the number 1. I think Whiskey Base, it's the number 1 whiskey.
Yeah.
I think highest rating on whiskyfund.com.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was 97 and it went up to 98 in the Bowmore tasting that you guys did.
I will be happy to go with a bouquet if I don't have a bottle of
Yeah, if you had to. And Aaron, what about you? Have you been able to try these whiskies as well?
You actually tried all 3 of them. I think I tried all 3 of them at the Auld Alliance at Emmanuel. So that was a very, very special moment for me. I've heard about these bottles for many, many years. I've seen pictures, but I've never been able to own a bottle at that time. So I was very lucky to know Emmanuel, and then he opened all these bottles, not at the same time, at different times. So I went to Singapore, a few times to try them. I remember trying the Laphroaig 67 Dark Sherry and the Bowmore Bouquet side by side. It was stunning. It's very, very difficult to describe my sentiment at that particular moment. But I believe it is exactly this kind of whiskeys that makes people continue to collect and drink whiskeys nowadays.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's an interesting one, because I guess these independent bottles, so on screen now we've got a picture of the Cadenhead Dumpies, which now you have as a kind of feature wall in Club Qing. It's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, these independent bottles, because they're things that I guess were normally quite low priced when they first were released, and now kind of generating a real buzz, especially amongst collectors. And I know that Aaron, you and Emmanuel both release independent bottlings for your bars as well. And I think you mentioned there's going to be a collaborative bottling coming up soon.
Yes, Emmanuel, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, we have been doing a lot of special bottling for our 10th anniversary this year and last year. So we did 1 year of bottling for our 10th anniversary. I'm drinking a Bowmore 1981 right now with that bottle last year. It's a 28 years old, beautiful Bowmore with a very nice saltiness and fruitiness. And so we did a Longbrew, we did a Bowmore, we did a Cognac 1922, we did amazing Calvados, we did 3 amazing cask of rum, and so I wanted to finish with a very small bottle and with a good friend of mine, which is Aaron, and so we found a very special cask of Old Isla sherry cask whiskey. Nobody knows what it is now, so I want more, but it's a beautiful, this is the color of the whiskey.
This
and
is the
so
one.
it will be released soon, and I think it's a stunning whiskey. So we are very happy to do that collaboration. Talking about for years about that, to do something nice together.
Maybe longer. Yeah.
Longer. And so yes, we are doing that, and it's all about whiskey. I mean, I like the idea that whiskey, the friendship about whiskey, you know, sometimes we forget about that, about price, and there is more and more competition and things like this. The beauty of it is the friendship, and get like someone with our own and go. We like to travel together to Japan, to Scotland, and to do some
Good things. Not
the great things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of interesting because on the one side we've got people like you who are you're collecting whiskeys, you're opening them, sharing them with people, bottling your own whiskeys, and then on the other side we have Ron, who's obviously up at the distillery with his nose in barrel samples, checking through the inventory and seeing what's going on. So I guess it's interesting to find out from Ron, do you find that when you're creating whiskeys, when you're looking through the warehouse inventory, are you thinking about these stories that are being told? Or are you trying to curate a kind of a really special bottling? I guess sometimes you have a certain style in mind, but are you thinking about that kind of end user and the way that this is going to be enjoyed and appreciated further down the line?
For me, every time looking to create a new expression and continue with the current expressions that we have, we're looking to produce the best whiskey that we can, and it's the whiskey that's to be enjoyed by consumers. There's no place in my job to look at, you know, will that be collectible? At the end of the day, it is there to be enjoyed. And we're making sure that when we produce our new mixed spirit, that the quality is correct. Always trying to improve that new spirit quality. And when it comes out the cask at the end of its maturation period, that it's the best it can be at that point in time. But yeah, it's all about consumer satisfaction. I'm sure that we meet that demand. If an expression turns out to be absolutely stunning and it starts getting great, then I guess it moves into the collectible side. I'm not really a collector. I've got a couple of bottles, but nothing like what Aaron and Emmanuel have. So it's not my thing. But it was interesting to see that the Holy Trinity was from, you know, the 1960s up to 1970, and the fact that 2 distilleries were producing styles of whiskey which are very much appreciated. But that kind of probably plays into the raw material being used at the time and the processes being used.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a pretty good segue into a discussion about the Black Bowmore cabinet. So I guess to give a intro to this, and you can see it on screen, this is the outside of the cabinet here. The Black Bowmore, which we've discussed before, is probably the most legendary bottle release from Bowmore Distillery, and it ain't just one bottle. There are 5 different releases. So I think the first released in 1994, and then most recently the the 50-year-old was released at your first year at Suntory, I believe, Ron, and that was your first taste of the Black Bowmore. So
it was, yes.
A pretty nice position to be in.
It was. I'm very, very privileged to be in the role I'm doing at the moment, and such an honour to be able to taste the 50-year-old Black Bowmore. Of course, we've got some old samples as well, so I was able to those a couple of other editions as well. So and
so speaking of which, I have so this is a look at the Black Bowmore. I'm just holding that up on screen. So obviously the reason it's called Black Bowmore is largely to do with the color, which is super dark. So this is extremely intense sherry maturation. Sorry, I'll hold that back up for you guys.
Sorry, just a wee bit of folklore. That when one of the Morrison family were trying to sell Black Bowmore, they were in Australia before it was released, and had offered some samples to a couple of salesmen, and one person said, "Oh, that'll be Black Bowmore then," and the name stuck. So it's something that we can give credit to.
It's true. It's a bottle for a group of for a whiskey club in Australia, the Bowmore 1964, 21 years old. So I got on 1985, and I think it was officially it was sold by someone from the Morrison family, I think. And it's a really rare bottle that a lot of people look for.
Yeah, I think
it's a story of the Black Bowmore. The beginning, they call it the Black Bowmore, and then it was released for the first time in the early 90s.
Yes, I've only seen that bottle once before, so I guess for most people it's the five bottles, and obviously the addition of the DB5 version that came in 2020. But what we have on screen here just now is the 5 different releases. So there's the first edition, second edition, third edition, which was called the final edition. Then we had the 4th edition at 42-year-old as part of the Trinity, and then the 50-year-old came. Even after the final edition, we had 2 further editions, which is a nice bonus to collectors. And this is all housed in this cabinet. So it's been designed by John Galvin, who I've spoken to a couple of times about this, and who spent, I think it was 2 years working on this project. And it's a real homage to 1960s Bowmore production. And the amount of care and attention that's gone into building it, incredible. So it's built with all bespoke pieces, and the amount of molding and hammering he did to try and create these shapes and hinges is pretty insane. And then also some of the material used in it is actually from the spirit safe that was used in the distillery during the 60s. So it's a pretty incredible piece of craftsmanship. And I think something that's pretty interesting is that, Aaron, the Black Bowmore was one of the first bottles that you tried through Emmanuel.
That's correct.
And so I guess for you guys, this probably, the Black Bowmore has a special place in your journey of whiskey collecting.
I have a story on that. Sorry, Aaron, if I cut you, but for me, the Black Bowmore it was the first whiskey which has a bit of marketing behind, and the first whiskey released in this way. And when I started to drink whiskey in 94, 95, I heard about the Black Bowmore. And I remember when I got my job, so when I created my newsletter, I sent to La Maison du Whisky, they offered me a job. I went to Paris, and one of the very first nice bottle I ever bought, it was a Black Bowmore. And I went to a shop and I found a bottle for 800 francs, so it was maybe 120 euro. And later on, I bought in total 9 bottles in Paris, going to different shops and try to find it. And it was already a cult status. I mean, the Black Bowmore was already something very special. I think it was the very first whiskey where distilleries tried to do a bit of marketing, nice box, special bottle with a special name. And that was so at that time it was already something very special.
And what do you think? So for these, I guess the the sherry balance is really important with these. It gives it the color and obviously contributes massively to the flavor.
Yeah.
But I suppose when we look at like the 1964 Bowmore from the Black Bowmore series and also the 1966 from the Bowmore Bouquet, what do you think is giving this? I mean, there's a sort of je ne sais quoi about this period, this 3-year period of Bowmore.
For me, already in Islay, when you mix amazing Islay whiskey with amazing sherry cask, the best sherry cask, you have like the mix of together, it creates another dimension to the whiskey. And it's not always a success, but when it's a success, it creates something outstanding. Is the case, I think, for the Black Bowmore. And the style of 64, 65, 66, and maybe early 67, it was very, the things really pure on the fruit, the exotic flavor, mango flavor was so unique in style, you know. And with at the background, you have a kind of saltiness, but is a very unique style. I think is the best whiskey you can drink. I mean, you can dream to drink. So
yeah. I mean, I've only been lucky enough to taste it a few times, but yeah, it is fantastic. And I guess this was one of the reasons that you got into whiskey in the first place.
Well, absolutely, yes. I think, you know, to me, Qing whiskey is a very special experience, especially drinking very good whiskeys. I was like very lucky because I've knew a lot of people, like one of them being Emmanuel. He taught me a lot of things about old and special whiskeys. And I was quite lucky to be into this whiskey world relatively early. I don't know if that's early. But to me, it's quite early. So I still have the chance to try a lot of legendary bottles before they become too expensive to afford. Just like, you know, bottles like this, the Bowmore 64 by Centenary, this is one of my favorite Bowmores. This is a legendary bottle. Wasn't very expensive until like the recent 5 years. This is a very, very good whiskey in a very humble bottle. I think at the time when it was released in 1979, there wasn't a lot of marketing at all. I don't think there's any marketing. So whiskeys like this was made to be consumed and enjoyed. So I think as a collector or as a bar owner, we have the responsibility to open these good bottles so that more people can try them.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's great that particularly in Asia, there's many of these bottles being opened and tasted. And so, Ron, I'd like to ask you about, excuse me, the period of distilling in 64, 65, 66, around this time. Obviously, the raw ingredients that are going to the production is slightly different. And I think the production at Bowmore changed itself in 64. And so we've actually got a close-up here on screen of the inside of the cabinet. So you can see the detail where they use the spirit safe to create these metal elements. Within one of these drawers, there's wood, peat, grain, and water. So Ron, I think maybe it'd be great if you could talk us through the changes at the distillery and then the relevance of these 4 elements inside this drawer here.
Okay, thanks, Jonny. So in terms of those raw ingredients and raw materials, they are key to Bowmore and how we produce our new make spirit. There's in that picture you'll see a drop of water encapsulated. That's from the River Lag, which is our water source which we use for steeping and for mashing. Of course, Bowmore has its own 4 maltings and has always had 4 maltings, so we continue that process, and we malt our own barley, which gives us greater control of the phenol levels in the malt. And of course, the raw materials back in the 60s, and we're talking about Black Bowmore being produced, they would be slightly different than they are now. Still a barley, but a barley variety, probably Zephyr, maybe Golden Promise, whereas now we've gone to different styles of barley. And then also, the process when we're mashing at Bowmore, wooden washbacks there. That previous picture showed a washback one which was replaced recently, and that wooden washback will add some flavours to the whisky as well. So the processes have changed a bit over the past 50 odd years, and the raw materials have changed. But we are trying to ensure that we capture the essence of that black Bowmore every time we make a Bowmore, and we might be lucky and reproduce that style. There's been a couple of occasions over the years that we have nearly got there, so we're still working on that. And the other piece on that cabinet, the handles on the drawers there, the handles from Spirit Safe, which ran at Bowmore from 1924 through to just a couple of years ago. So the spirit that made Black Bowmore would have run through the spirit still, that had those handles. So
yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? It's sort of a shrine to Black Bowmore and to kind of old style. And especially speaking to John Galvin, who he famously made quite a lot of different imitation cases for various whiskey releases over a few years. This seems like it was a real labour of love for him, so it's quite exciting. But it's interesting to talk about. Okay, so the things that have changed between now and the 60s, are the raw materials, the process within the distillery itself. I guess there's this kind of style whiskey, and we hear a lot of people talk about old style. And I guess this is to do with processes in the distilleries, and it's to do with the types of barrel used to mature the whiskey as well. So I'd be interested to know. I mean, everyone has a kind of. The phrase "whole ale" comes up a lot, particularly for things like the Macallan 1926. But it'd be interesting to know on the collector side, for Aaron, let's ask you first. Is there a whiskey out there that is this sort of old style holy grail that you really want to get your hands on, that is something that you just aren't able to get anymore, or at least is different from what you can get nowadays?
Well, yes, I'm sure every series collector, they do have their holy grails. Usually I won't disclose what I'm going after, because if I disclose it, it will be 10 times more difficult. But I have heard rumors that there's actually bottles from Port Allen that was made in the late 1920s. I'm sure those bottles existed at one point. Whether or not they still exist, I'm not sure. But a bottle of Port Allen from the late 1920s will be my holy grail bottle.
You know, there is a story that there is a mini existing on the Isla.
I know.
You know that.
You told me about this. Yes. We should drink that together, you know.
A mini as in like a miniature bottle?
A miniature bottle.
A real one, you know.
A real.
Yeah. So you got to get to Isla. That's the first challenge.
With a lot of cash.
Yeah, exactly. With a lot of money. And how about you, Emmanuel? Is there anything that you've been desperate to get your hand on?
I have few bottles, of course, I look for. I will really like to find, and like Aaron, I think if you talk about it, it will be difficult to find. But definitively, what I want to try is things I never tried. So I would like to try the whiskey from distilleries that has closed. I mean, like Looking Down, Nyla, and this kind of distillery. I would love to try. I won't say a malt mill, because I think I may be one of the few guys try a malt mill, but this kind of whiskey, try find whiskey which has disappeared, which doesn't exist anymore, you know. We are still lucky today to try a little mill or outside, but maybe in 50 years it will be maybe more difficult for people to try this kind of whiskey. And so it's to just grow my knowledge of the history of Scotch whiskey, and this is what I try to look for.
Sure. I think that is one of those things that I guess the three main elements I think that appeal to collectors these days seem to be either closed distillers, which obviously there's a sort of there's an innate rarity to these bottles, because you know even though all whiskey produced in the past will never be produced again.
Yeah.
Similar whiskies will be produced, but whiskey kind of runs out anyway. But it's from a closed distillery, then there are only so many bottles around, and they get consumed, fewer exist. So I guess closed distilleries seems to be one of the big drivers for collectors. I would say that peated whiskies tend to be another thing. Like everyone, or at least a lot of people, are so into that certain aspect. And then the third thing I think would be the heavy sherry style. So I mean, yeah, like the Macallan 1926, for instance, Black Bowmore, these super dark liquids. And I think that Japanese whiskey's actually done a pretty good job of encapsulating this dark sherry. So like Yamazaki, they tend to go down the heavy shade route, and Kurosawa 1960 obviously is famous for that as well. So Aaron, maybe it'd be interesting to see what you think about how does the Japanese whiskey market, do you think, work in tandem or against Scotch whiskey? How much do you think it lends a bit of gratitude to the Scotch whiskey production methods? And what do you think about this sort of heavy style? Is that what you think drives collectors out in the East?
Well, first of all, I think Japanese whiskey is very good. I think they go hand in hand together with Scotch whiskies, and also other kind of whiskey, like maybe Irish whiskey, Taiwanese, US brand. As long as they're good whiskeys, I think there will be a market. The reason why people are, keep on talking about Japanese whiskeys recently is probably because auction houses put a lot of emphasis on Japanese whiskeys. So when Japanese whiskeys are constantly under spotlight, they become popular. When they become more popular, there are more auction items, and then this just goes, on and on. So I think this is one of the main reasons why Japanese whiskey is becoming very popular in recent years. Of course, the quality is super good as well. Not all Japanese distilleries are great, I have to say. But most of the old ones, the ones with a long history, they are very good. I like Yamazaki a lot. I like Yoichi a lot. I like Hanyu a lot. I collect Hanyu. I like Kurosawa as well. So, these are the good bottles, good Japanese whiskeys. Speaking about sherry cask, I think the mysterious power of sherry cask doesn't only lies in Japanese whiskey, but also in Scotch whiskeys. Look at Macallan. Macallan is so famous for their sherry cask, and as Emmanuel has talked about this earlier, I think one of the main reasons why people start to appeal to sherry cask is because Macallan market themselves as the most prestigious whiskeys in the world, and they are in sherry cask. So people who try Macallan will have an impression that sherry cask is more superior, it's more prestige. That's why they become more popular.
Yeah, I think that there could be a part of that in there. I think also it seems to me that the approachability to sherry cask, and I think also this works as well with peated whiskey, that it seems to be easy to identify those flavors. Like there's not a lot of subtlety necessarily in a really heavily peated whiskey, even though it will have layers of subtlety underneath. I think it's easy for anyone to say, okay, I identify that heavy smoke, and with sherry, it's like I identify that dried fruit flavor, and it sort of offers an access to Scotch whiskey for people who perhaps are trying to hone their palate and understand the variabilities in different tastes. But so at this point, I think we will say a very big thank you to you three for joining me. It's been a great opportunity to discuss Scotch and Japanese whiskey, and of course the Black Bowmore cabinet. And so I'd like to remind everyone that we have our sale in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Convention Centre on the 18th of April. That's going to be led by the Bowmore cabinet, and there will also be a range of other whiskies in that sale, such as the Macallan Fine and Rare, some Glenfarclas family casks, various Japanese whiskies, and of course some Moutai from China as well. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been great to discuss and really kind of you to lend your time. And so now we're going to move on to, okay, so we've hit an hour. That's been 1 hour of whiskey chat. That was great. Thank you so much, guys. It was really interesting, fascinating to hear, you know, tales direct from the distillery from Ron, and then Aaron and Emmanuel from you guys out in Asia about all your expertise. Yeah. So cheers. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Cheers.
And I hope we can do it again soon, hopefully in person at some point once travel again.
Yeah, in Islay would be even better.
In Islay, yeah, exactly. We're all going to Ron's house.
Oh, nice.